You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Let's see. What it would say? Arms in the vehicle. Okay, got that check. Legs in the vehicle. Got that check. Yeah. Okay. So what happens now? Oh, wait, we're live. Hey, Chris Voss here. I was just making sure I got ready for the show per the announcer. Welcome to the Chris Voss Show, my friends and relatives and all those people listening to the show. We certainly appreciate you guys coming by. Thanks for being here. We have returning guest Jude Morrow on the show, my good friend from Ireland across the pond, as they like to say. His third appearance on the show. We actually had him back 3 times. We liked him that much, and I think you'll like him as well, 3 times as much as however you liked him before. And if you didn't know him before, that's 300% more that you'll like him from 0. So that's a payoff, really, when it comes down to it. Anyway, guys, go see his books on goodreads.com/Chris Voss of mine. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Go to all those places we are on the interwebs. We're doing a lot of stuff over on LinkedIn. If you're not seeing what we're going on LinkedIn, it's crazy over there. And also go see what we're doing on the TikTok. We're trying to be cool on the TikTok. It's not working, but we are getting lots of people that are watching the videos and interacting. We're just not like TikTok famous yet, which probably is never going to happen. But you know how that goes. Anyway, he's on the show with us today. He's going to be talking to us about his amazing new novel. He's written, I think, 3 books so far, and this one's a bit of a departure from what he's normally written about. We'll talk to him about that. The name of the book is called The Ghosts of Riots Past, the Troubled Conflict in Derry Through the Eyes of a Volunteer First Aider. Jude Morrow is on the show with us today. We'll be talking to him about his book. Came out September 1st, 2021, and we're going to find out more about it. Welcome to the show, Jude. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic. By the way, I noticed something with your intro. You didn't do the singy Chris Voss Show, but the Chris Voss Show.
I can throw it in if you want.
Please. It's like it's
the Chris Voss Show.com. How about that? Is that good? Yeah,
that's okay.
We try and improv the ramble that we do at the beginning every time. We try and make it different so it's not the same. Because people get bored with that stuff. Like, Chris, it's Chris doing his stupid stuff again, right?
But that's a trademark. That would be like McDonald's stopping the "I'm loving it" thing. I mean, you can't just do that. Or finger licking good for KFC. It stays. It's uniform.
That's very true. That's very true. Sometimes we just like to make the show different. Sometimes you can't give it to them all the time. You gotta make them miss it, Jude.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I must actually note that down. Because I'm very much a head first kind of guy. So
yeah. See, right now, everybody's all up in arms. Like, damn it, he didn't sing the intro. What the hell is going on? Is this even the show anymore? The Chris Voss Show? Maybe it's not even the same guy. And they're gonna go listen next time to the next show and go, he better do it this time. And so, you got to mess with people. You got to make them appreciate I don't know where the hell we're going. Let's talk about your book. So you've got a third new book out. You've written 2 books on neurodiversity and autism. Yeah, you've written 2 books on that. And then this third one is a novel. Is that correct?
It is.
Do I have that right?
It is. Yeah. Where I'd written "Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad?" The Loving Your Place in the Spectrum, and was delighted to be on the Chris Voss Show with both of those kind of book promo tours.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do the third book, where the first book was like my experiences going up through school and college as an autistic child, and then the second one was more like my social work career, business career, kind of motivationally speakery, type of stuff. Mm-hmm. But then I realized, like, last year, I was like, holy crap, I have run out of life to write about. Where in last November, I was only 31, where I was like, I've chronicled literally my whole life. So I needed to go to something different. And last year, around it was October and November last year. I mean, in Derry every year the Bloody Sunday massacre is commemorated on the 30th of January every year. The horrible day itself happening on the 30th of January 1972, which meant that 2022 was the 50th anniversary commemoration
Oh wow,
of Bloody Sunday. And you know what? Even though I live here, have grown up here, I didn't know anything about it.
really?
I was really, yeah, and I mean, I d- I was born in 1990. I'm a young, youthful go-getter, and I didn't grow up through the troubled time. I didn't I didn't have any concept of violence in the streets, and I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to make a conscious effort and get to know my local history a bit more.
Hmm.
So I went to the first thing that anybody who wants to learn stuff goes to, which is Google or the internet, or in my case, like picture books.
Mm.
And I was looking through these picture books of the city and like riots everywhere. I mean, the place was horribly filthy with like barricades and burnt out cars and buses and everything. And I noticed there was like these like young people, like teens, wearing like fancy, like officery type uniforms.
Mm.
And I thought, who are they? And some like wearing like white medical coats and stuff. And they were all children, and the white coats were way too big on them. And I thought, right, this is interesting. And they are or were the Order of Malta Ambulance Corps, or would be known as the Knights of Malta. So I was thinking,
Oh.
first aid? That's a cool angle. I was like, nobody's talked about that, I don't think.
Mm.
And I ended up being correct. Nobody's ever written a book about it. None of them, the first aid corps of that time, wrote a book about themselves, because what people don't understand, my city in 1969 became a self-declared autonomous zone where it's was, if anything, and it was called Free Derry. That's the Free Derry period, 1969
Oh.
to 1972, where the residents of Free Derry, which was an 888-acre perimeter area, barricaded themselves in to reject the police force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and the British Army, and
Mm.
everything else. Where it was just enough's enough. Because when you think of a humanitarian crisis, you normally think of people being displaced from their homeland, but we were the opposite, where we barricaded ourselves in. And because we barricaded ourselves in, other emergency healthcare services and provision couldn't really get access. So it was
Wow.
left to these teenage girls to provide healthcare. Now, it was mostly teenage girls, about 3/4 of them. There were some boys, there were some older ones as well. But mostly it was these teenage girls that ran a healthcare network, and they treated everybody
Oh
without fail.
wow. Wow. And so do you base the book around those teenage girls that were doing the medical stuff?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, whenever the violence really started, I mean, from 1969 onwards, the community needed them. They were a pillar of the community. They were overseen by some doctors and nurses in makeshift first aid posts that were
Mhm.
kind of scattered around the Free Derry area. There was three like main ones. There was a lot of other little pop-up ones as well. And the work they did in these first aid posts is baffling. Where it
Hmm.
went beyond the limits of first aid, where they were stitching people up with like household needles and thread. They didn't have stuff. Like they didn't really have.
Seriously.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's lay a foundation on why this takes place and the events that lead up to Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and what Sunday or what Bloody Sunday was. Can we lay a foundation on that and talk about how we got to that? Why we had to have free dairy and all this stuff.
Well, with Free Derry was established after the Battle of the Bogside of 1969. It was 3 days of intense riots between the Bogside residents and the RUC, the police force, and eventually the Bogsiders won and
Mhm.
expelled the RUC from the area and barricaded themselves in.
What what
Where,
what what prompted that? What was the disagreement?
well, the nationalist areas were mainly oppressed by a sectarian kind of government and a police force that, I suppose, propped up that sectarian government,
Oh,
where, Protestant and loyalist and unionist people got much more preference when it came to housing, healthcare,
oh,
education, and even votes. So, because of that, the civil rights movement was born in 1968, 1969, and it kept going forward even after those riots. And eventually, in 1971, the violence was a daily occurrence. The British government had brought in an internment policy, so anybody they believed was a member of the IRA or a sympathizer was basically thrown in jail, long cash internment camp.
Wow.
So after a lot of kind of protest demonstrations, and even they were banned. Protest demonstrations were banned, but on the 30th of January 1972, another anti-internment civil rights march was arranged,
Mhm.
and it took place. And by 4:30 on that day, 13 men and boys were murdered on the street
Wow.
by the parachute regiment, shot in the back mostly whilst running away from the troops.
Wow.
A 14th dying later of his injuries. And that was the kind of a micro kind of explanation of the political situation here then. And,
Mhm.
whilst this was all going on, the wounded and the people that were in really awful condition health-wise were tended to by a teenage voluntary ambulance corps.
Wow. I mean, because you have on the cover, you have it looks like a young lady dressed in medical garb, and of
Mhm.
course the rioting going on in the back. And this was a big thing. You two wrote about Sunday Bloody Sunday. I believe the song Sunday Bloody Sunday is a reference to this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an event of huge historical significance. It was a catastrophe for the people who live here. It accelerated so many years of war and
Yeah.
conflict
In the
afterward.
IRA.
Yeah, I mean, of course, whenever you have the parachute regiment murdering 13 people in one day in basically one road, one street, and such a small area, then of course it created community resentment, which made people take up arms and take the war back.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember living through the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, I believe, with the IRA, doing all sorts of stuff, not only over there, but in England, in America, around the world. It was quite the I don't know, the battle, I suppose maybe is the right word.
Well, it was. I mean, this was a conflict that raged from basically 1969 to, well, 1994, 1998, kind of, that kind of time period, where the IRA had, I suppose, called their ceasefire in 1994. It was, it had ended a couple of times in between until the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which I suppose declared an end to the conflict as people
Hmm.
knew it at that point. Where, I mean, and since then, like since 1998, there's been lots of developments. I mean, the Bloody Sunday murdered, their names were cleared because the army had said that they were nail bombers. Petrol bombers had been firing rifles at them, and they just weren't. They were innocent
Wow.
men and boys. Where a lot of people had written books, a lot of RUC men wrote books, a lot of army officers wrote books, IRA men and women wrote books, but the kind of story that was missing was
Hmm.
that of the first aid personnel, of which there were
Hmm.
many.
Hmm.
Be- and I think it's because of their kind of vow to serve all the lords injured, sick, and poor. Like the Order of Malta is a very, very long-standing thing. That's about 1,200 years old.
Wow.
But the ambulance corps itself is only, what, about 90 years old.
Hmm.
And the perspective just hasn't been touched. And what's interesting is they treated everybody. They
Wow.
treated civilians, army, paramilitary, everybody. They treated everybody without favor. And nobody's ever really kind of talked about it, because I suppose whenever it comes to history, especially social histories,
Hmm.
there's a saying that is so true. It's like the creakiest gate always gets the most oil, where that's what narrative gets pushed out into the public consciousness. And even post conflict, you get kind of gates being creakier and louder.
Hmm.
But this one I did find, and I feel so almost blessed and lucky to have found something that was so rich with information and stories and people that were willing to talk to me about it,
Ah,
that,
those
that nobody had ever done.
That was my next question for you. Were you able to interview people from the events? And then this is a historical novel, correct? So
Yeah.
why did you choose to go that way with it as opposed to just telling maybe the stories of the people that were involved?
Because I wanted to capture emotion and a spirit rather than do an academic study of it.
Mhm,
Um, I mean, I wanted to kind of tell the story in a creative way that was sensitive to the events that take place in it. Where
mhm.
I'd had become acquainted with the Museum of Free Derry, who were fantastic in helping me get connected with people, and I'd approached them to see if anybody that were in the Knights of Malta between 1969 and 1972 would be willing to talk.
Mhm.
And some came forward initially, and I said at my first book launch that the first time I met them, we met them all together, and it was almost like having a first date with 15 people.
Oh, wow.
Where because don't forget there was, this was 50 years ago, and they
Yeah.
had, tribunals, lawyers, journalists, other nosy people writing books and stuff like that wanting to interview them. So I
Uh-huh.
thought I'm gonna have a different strategy
Oh,
where there's a truth serum that we use here in Ireland, and it's used in England as
is
well.
it called whiskey?
Close, it's tea and cake.
Oh, well, there you go.
And and
Extortioner.
so basically what I did was we'd met in a group setting quite a bit and individually and stuff. And because some of them hadn't seen or talked to each other in 40 years plus. So it was an opportunity to reconnect with old friends, have some tea and cake, catch up, and then I got to eavesdrop and write down what they talked about.
Oh.
Where I had terms of reference at the start where I didn't plan on talking to them about Bloody Sunday
Mm.
because there's reports out there that there was the Savile inquiry, which lasted, what, I think about 10, 11 years. And they'd all done statements for that. And I thought, I'll use those because their stance isn't going to change. And I'd wanted to know about like how it ran, their camaraderie, their friendships, and other obscure kind of silly details like, what shoulders they wore their bags on, what was in the bags, any witty anecdotes. But what I did learn is that none of them had talked about Bloody Sunday among
Oh, wow.
themselves.
Oh,
It had
wow.
never happened. Where eventually the conversation did turn that way. And with some anyway, there was definitely some elements of healing or closure because,
Mm.
PTSD wasn't invented in 1972.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mental
Still
health
invented.
care wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't. And most of the Bloody Sunday First Aid Corps were aged between 15 and 19.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, some of them went to school like a few days later or went back to work. And what they had to do was just get on with it, keep busy, and pray. Because
Yeah.
that was the kind of standard mental health advice of 1972.
There
And
you go.
it was, although 50 years later, some people definitely got something out of talking about it and sharing their perspective on it and how it impacted them. And with some of those, they've actually been kept as appendices that are in the back of this book. So yes, it's a historical fiction narrative, but some of
Mhm.
them have included their real stories in the back as well.
How did you blend in some of the between the real characters and people you interviewed and the characters that you put into the book? And I mean, I imagine there's a main character or some main characters that you have in the book. Did you base those on anyone real that you interviewed, or did you totally fictionalize those in your head?
No, well, one thing I did want to do was to have Martha. This is Martha
Hmm.
here. She's the main character in the book.
Hmm.
And I kind of designed her to be a bit of a nondescript nobody.
Okay.
Um, so what I did was from the kind of timeline between 1969 and 1972, a lot happened. A lot of people witnessed a lot of things, and they've all been compiled into one book or
Hmm.
whatever. Various other volumes that are read in the research phase. So I thought, see, like most of the highlights and lowlights, what I could do with a fictional observer is just place her there, but not really to interfere.
Hmm.
Because, yes, Martha tells the story. Martha is the narrator, but Martha doesn't do anything, of any great note. She's just there.
Okay.
And I mean, because with a real person, one person couldn't possibly have seen every pivotal moment in the Free Derry story, but with the benefit of hindsight, I could create somebody that could be at all the right and wrong places at all the right and wrong times.
Hmm.
And that was the idea, and that's how she came about.
That's pretty awesome. Did you talk to anybody who was wounded in the events?
Yes, I did. Where you know what? Where see even some of the first aiders themselves picked up injuries on Bloody Sunday. One was
Wow.
shot in the face with a rubber bullet from about
Ow.
4 feet. Those things travel at 100 feet a second.
Oh, I've seen
Where
what
she-
they do to human flesh. They're not
like
cool.
like she was wearing a gas mask at the time, which no
Mhm.
doubt saved her life. And some others were abused, kicked, punched, spat on. I mean, teenage girls spat on by British paratroopers in uniform. And probably one of the undocumented war crimes of the century, in my opinion, which just happened and people acknowledge it happened, but it hasn't really been compiled in a volume like I've done that I know of. And
Hmm.
I mean, because there's still people here that were there on
Mhm.
Bloody Sunday. I mean, I spoke to many of them who were there. Who, I mean, some carry not just kind of physical injuries from that day and time or that time period, but the trauma, the sadness, the loss, the bereavement, and
Mhm.
everything. So I felt a real responsibility to tell the story correctly and factually, and not have Martha do anything otherworldly in it that would be ridiculous. I wouldn't have placed her with at certain points.
Mhm. And do you cover the events of that day, or and thereafter, and the fallout, or
Yeah, yeah.
how does the book go through the process? It probably sets up the characters beforehand, and then before the events happen, and then gets into the details from there.
Yeah, it does. Where I mean, the kind of outline of the story is, I have this, Martha, who experiences a family bereavement, is inspired to join the Order of Malta. A very standard storyline. I mean, it's simple as anything. It's just a very simple storyline. And then, whenever she joins the Order of Malta Ambulance Corps, that's the real people.
Mm.
Because I mean, some of them were first aids, service first aiders for 45, 50 years plus. A couple of them are actually still in it, where and different guises where they've climbed the ranks, and are in leadership roles now, and have been in it all their lives. So it's kind of getting the focus on them,
Mhm.
and what they did, where not necessarily as individuals, but as a unit,
Mhm.
and to kind of capture all of as much of their service as possible, to kind of really stress the importance of this is how important these people were to the community at that time, where this was a populace of about, I don't know, maybe like Free Derry. How many people live in Free Derry? I don't know what to guess, about 40,000.
Mhm.
40,000 people. That's just a blind guess, an approximate, where ambulances wouldn't really have come in. Law
Wow.
enforcement certainly didn't come in. The army didn't come in. Nobody came in. So it was very, very hard to get, medical aid, first aid, and even spiritual aid inside that barricaded seclusion zone,
Wow.
which had to be provided by these heroes here.
That is wild what took place on that day, and I think there's film of it too and stuff, isn't there?
Oh, there is. I mean, there's
Yeah.
photograph. Like, I mean, there was tons of and most of the kind of pivotal days of my city's history. I mean, there was cameras there. There was the news were there.
Mhm.
Everything from amateur filmmakers. Actually, one of whom was murdered on Bloody Sunday. William
Oh,
McKinney
wow.
was an amateur filmmaker, who had a cine camera with him that day, and
Wow.
that cine camera is on display in the Museum of Free Derry here. So, I
Wow.
mean, the events from then were very, very well documented
Mhm.
by many different people, because I know now we have social media, we have the internet, we have filters and whatever
Mhm.
else. But back then, a lot more people were diarists, photographers, and there was people gave a bit more of a personal kind of social story where there's not many diarists anymore, is there? It's a bit of a dying art.
I wrote that in my diary last night. There's not many no. I mean, yeah, I mean, I use Facebook kind of as a diary, Facebook posts, which sadly my followers have to. It's like, what did he write today? And so I use that as a diary. But yeah, you're right. But a lot of people aren't around today doing that.
No, there's not. And with your Facebook as your diary, yeah, I mean that's one of my favorite things that I do with my coffee. I listen to the Chris Voss Show, and then I look at your Facebook, and then I roll your eyes and say, he's getting
He's
closer and
going
closer to
on
the
a
edge.
he's going on again about whatever.
Yeah, he has never change.
Well, it's always something to get up your ass every morning and write about on Facebook, I suppose. I don't know. So there you go. Well, this is a hell of a historical thing. It had an impact in long term in the history of our world. Hasn't these things ever been settled up finally over there in Ireland? Is everything okay these days and everyone's getting along?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say everybody's getting along. I would say, the killing of one another isn't as frequent,
The
wh- which
murdering
is
is down. That's good.
which is a wonderful thing. I mean, it's a good step in the right direction. Things are a lot better than what they were, but
Mhm.
it's funny, with because another interviewer asked me the same thing. It's like, so are things okay over there now? Like, I mean, I didn't live through the real dark days, but what is interesting is that with the amount of people that I did speak to during the dark days, they still had happy times. They made good memories. They raised their families. They went to their jobs, and a lot stayed friends. Where even though where the where I lived was an active war zone for 3 decades or more,
Jesus.
good times did happen in there too, as well as the tragic, sad, pivotal, world-changing ones.
Mhm.
And I thought that was important to capture as well,
Yeah,
where
the
you know
humanity of it.
life went on, time, came and went,
Mhm.
and it was a very, very interesting time, and I loved researching it. I loved getting into it, and I still feel some sense of shame and embarrassment that I didn't know much about it 52 weeks ago.
Mhm.
And like I'm learning more and more about it every day. I think I've taken on like a
Oh, wow.
lifelong interest in local history now.
Maybe another book is in the works there.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is. There you go.
Maybe it is.
It's but it's important, even with historical novels, they shine a light on history that needs to be needs more feature. The one thing man can learn from his history is that he never learns from his history. And so we need to learn from our history and we need to educate ourselves on what took place so we don't repeat it. That's always a good
Exactly.
thing I hear. I don't know. That's what I'm going with.
No,
Um,
it is a good thing, and I mean, it just goes to show with even with the ghosts of riots past, it's like even though a lot of the events took place 50, 51, 52, 53 years ago, is
mhm.
that the story's still being told after all this time, and will probably still be being told in 50 years' time in new ways and from new perspectives, and new things come up, like things appear in attics, boxes of photographs, diaries, notes, documents, artifacts that can keep on telling the story, like even with the Titanic, like the Titanic's lying at the bottom of the Atlantic 110 years, and they're still finding new stuff down there. They're finding new
Oh,
artifacts, bits of jewelry, chairs, whatever. They're still finding stuff down there. And, things are coming up here and there where the story's still being told and will
yeah.
probably be told forever. At least I hope it does.
That's what makes it interesting, the humanity of it all, we can learn from our experiences, stuff like that. It's, of course, a historical novel, so we can't tell you what's at the end and give away most of the middle work. Anything more you want to tease out on the book?
I think whenever people read it, people are shocked to find that they didn't know a lot of the stuff
Mhm.
that was in it. Where I mean, with the first aid story, it's never really been told in one volume in this kind of depth. And I mean, I thought it's just it's amazing to me. Even even still, like, I mean, I'll kind of let you in on an author secret.
Oh,
Maybe
there
it's
we
not
go.
an author
We got an
secret,
author secret.
but for the last two books, I'd read them so many times before they were released
Mhm.
that I was like, ugh. Where I've counted how many times I've read this book,
Uh-huh.
and I've read it 26 times.
26 times. Holy crap.
26 times, and I
And you
haven't
wrote it.
and I wrote it. I know. I put it down on paper, and I don't get sick of it, which
There you go.
which is a good thing. And I think it's going to be very hard kind of getting into book 4 now, but I suppose I'll pick myself up and go forward with it. But I mean, even for other people, like, to look at the first aid perspectives, like, even during the wars, any wars, there was first aid efforts, humanity. And even though there's some really disgusting, vile things that happened in the world, there were
Mhm.
good people like the Order of Malta that tried to put smiles on faces, wipe away tears, dress wounds, and basically let people like me know that there's some good people out there and that humanity isn't fucked.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the humanity of it all, really, when it comes down to the experience of human nature and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, this has been pretty insightful. It's been wonderful to have you on, Jude, again. Give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
Okie dokie. Well, look at my website, it's judemorrow.com. You can pick up The Ghosts of Riots Past at Barnes & Noble, online, Amazon. If you're local to Derry, Little Acorns Bookstore, shop local, support local, and yeah, reach out to me. I mean, I'm on all the social medias. I'm a big, awkward-looking man with a beard, and my name's Jude Morrow, and I love talking about it. I love answering questions about it, and I like offering like an interactive reading experience. So even if you're like listening or watching this in like 10 years time through like VR, or if they invent like a microchip that's implanted in your brain where you can program your brain to put on the Chris Voss Show every morning, still reach out to me, because I'll
Yeah.
probably still love this topic in 10 years time as much as I love it now.
It sounds like you really love it and you're really proud of the work you've done, and you've done it interesting enough. I know people online have been gushing about it, so it's been pretty awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Jude. We really appreciate it, man.
And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming again. We'll look forward to the 4th book. There's some pressure for you.
Oh, no.
There you go. There you go. Order up the book, folks, wherever fine books are sold. The Ghosts of Riots Past, the troubled conflict in Derry through the eyes of a volunteer first aider. Learn about history. Learn what took place, and it's interesting how much there is that you don't know. And so learning about this stuff is pretty cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Be sure to see all our places on the interwebs, and we'll see you guys next time.